when HR looked at me with those empty eyes and said, "Company policy doesn't cover overtime pay. You should read your contract." I knew they'd just stolen 200 hours of my life, but what they didn't know was that I still had one card left to play. And it was tucked inside a 3-line email addressed directly to the Department of Labor. My name is Natalie Grant, and at 32, I'd spent 6 years of my life at Redwell Capital Solutions in Columbus, Ohio. 6 years of arriving early, leaving late, and being labeled too nice to promote by the same executives who relied on my financial analyses to keep their bonuses intact. Redwell was one of those mid-tier financial consulting firms that prided itself on its family culture while working its employees like we were training for the Olympics of corporate suffering. The building's glass facade reflected the Ohio skyline, but inside, it was all fluorescent lights and the quiet desperation of people afraid to lose their health insurance. I'd survived the massive restructuring that hit us last spring, watched as 40% of my department got pink slips while the rest of us inherited their workloads. Our CEO, Marcus Whitfield, had stood before the remaining staff in the main conference room, his Armani suit impeccable as always, and delivered his speech about shared sacrifice and weathering the storm together. "Those who remain are the backbone of this company," he'd said, his voice echoing off the walls covered in motivational posters about synergy and excellence. "Your dedication during these challenging times won't be forgotten." The culture at Redwell was simple. Complain and you're ungrateful. Set boundaries and you're not a team player. Ask for overtime pay and you're laughably naive. Everyone knew the game. We'd watch new hires come in bright-eyed, full of ambition, only to see that light dim after their first 70-hour week. The smart ones left within a year. The rest of us? We convinced ourselves that loyalty would eventually pay off. I wasn't stupid. I had a finance degree from Ohio State and could calculate exactly how much unpaid labor I donated to Redwell's bottom line over the years. But I also had student loans, a mortgage on a modest condo in the short north, and an aging mother whose medical bills seemed to multiply every month. Walking away felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. So when the restructuring hit and they asked us to step up, I did what I always did. I smiled, nodded, and added another 10 hours to my already bloated work week. They assigned me to the Emergency Financial Restructuring Project, a 4-month sprint to save the company from what management euphemistically called temporary liquidity challenges. "Natalie, we need someone we can trust on this," my direct supervisor, Brian Morrison, had said, leaning against my cubicle wall with his coffee mug that read, "World's Best Boss," a gift from his wife who'd never worked a day in corporate America. Someone who understands that sometimes we all need to go above and beyond. Above and beyond. That phrase would echo in my head for months to come, especially during those late nights when the office was empty except for me and the cleaning crew, who'd started bringing me extra trash bags because they knew I'd be there long after they finished their rounds. The emergency restructuring project started in May, right when the rest of Columbus was enjoying perfect spring weather. While my friends posted photos of weekend trips to Hocking Hills, I lived in a windowless conference room surrounded by financial statements and projection models. 60 to 70 hours a week became my new normal. Though normal suggests there was anything remotely sustainable about it. Brian had promised it would be worth it. "This is your chance to shine, Natalie," he'd said during one of our status meetings. "Upper management is watching. When we pull through this, and we will, there's going to be recognition. Big recognition. Maybe even that senior analyst position you've been eyeing." I clung to those words like a lifeline during the brutal weeks that followed. My days started at 7 a.m. with mandatory alignment meetings, corporate speak for making sure we were all sufficiently panicked about the company's financial hemorrhaging. The real work began after that. Restructuring debt portfolios, negotiating with creditors, creating presentation after presentation for nervous investors. The emails were relentless. My phone would buzz at 11 p.m. with urgent requests from Brian or his boss. Patricia Henley, the CFO who somehow managed to maintain her spa appointments while the rest of us deteriorated. "Need revised projections by 7 a.m. tomorrow." One would read, Include 3 scenarios with sensitivity analysis. Translation: kiss your sleep goodbye. Saturdays became just another workday. I'd arrive at the office to find I wasn't alone. A handful of other dedicated team players hunched over their laptops, sustained by vending machine coffee and the false hope of future rewards. We'd exchange tired smiles, united in our exploitation, but too exhausted to acknowledge it out loud. The physical toll was immediate. I developed a persistent eye twitch from staring at spreadsheets. My back ached from hunching over my desk. I started keeping makeup in my desk drawer to hide the dark circles that no amount of concealer could fully mask. My diet consisted of whatever could be microwaved in under 3 minutes. But it was the psychological erosion that cut deepest. I watched my colleagues, the ones not assigned to the project, leave at 5 p.m. sharp, heading to happy hours I was no longer invited to. They'd stopped asking. They knew the answer would always be, I can't. I have to work. I became a ghost in my own life, present only in the office, invisible everywhere else. The missed moments accumulated like compound interest. My mother's birthday dinner, I sent flowers instead. My best friend's promotion celebration. I managed a congratulatory text between meetings. My nephew's soccer game. I promised I'd make the next one, knowing I was lying. Throughout it all, I documented everything. Maybe it was the accountant in me, but I kept meticulous records. Screenshots of emails demanding weekend work, photos of the office clock showing 10 p.m., 11 p.m., midnight, a spreadsheet tracking every hour beyond the standard 40, color-coded by week. By the end of month 3, that spreadsheet showed 200 hours of overtime, 200 hours of my life donated to Redwell's survival. I rationalized it all. This was temporary. This was an investment in my future. This was what professionals did. But late at night, when the office was silent except for the hum of computers and the distant sound of janitors' carts, darker thoughts crept in. I thought about my colleague Sarah, who'd had a panic attack in the bathroom and never came back. I thought about Tom from IT, who'd worked similar hours until his wife filed for divorce. The breaking point came gradually, then all at once. It was a Thursday night in August, and I was entering hour 13 of my workday when Patricia sent another email. Need complete reforecast by morning. Board meeting moved up. I stared at my screen, the cursor blinking accusingly in the reply field. My hands trembled slightly. Too much caffeine, not enough food. Through the window, I could see people dining at the restaurant across the street, laughing over wine, living actual lives. That's when Jason, a former colleague who'd escaped to a competitor, texted me, "Heard about your project? They're already planning the victory lap. Henley's been bragging about the cost savings from voluntary overtime. You keeping track?" Voluntary. The word tasted bitter. As voluntary as breathing when you're drowning. When the project wrapped in September, Redwell had successfully avoided bankruptcy. The company newsletter featured a glowing article about our heroic efforts and unwavering commitment. There was even a pizza party, as if pepperoni could compensate for lost time with loved ones. I watched Brian shake hands and accept congratulations while those of us who'd done the actual work picked at our slices in exhausted silence. 2 weeks later, I made an appointment with HR. I'd prepared carefully, printing out my overtime documentation, rehearsing my words, professional but firm, reasonable but clear. I wasn't asking for charity, I was asking for compensation I'd earned. Tanya Rhodes, our head of HR, kept me waiting 20 minutes past our scheduled time. When she finally called me in, she didn't apologize. Her office was a shrine to corporate feminism. Nevertheless, she persisted mugs and girl boss plaques arranged between her diplomas and certifications. "What can I do for you, Natalie?" she asked, already glancing at her computer screen, fingers poised to multitask through our conversation. I placed my documentation on her desk. I wanted to discuss compensation for the overtime hours I worked during the restructuring project. I've logged approximately 200 hours beyond my standard schedule. Tanya's fingers stopped moving. She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since I'd walked in. Her expression shifted from distracted courtesy to something harder, more calculating. I see, she said, leaning back in her chair. And what exactly are you expecting? To be paid for the hours I worked, I replied, keeping my voice steady. Time and a half, as per Ohio labor laws for overtime. The silence stretched between us. I could hear the air conditioning humming, someone laughing in the hallway. Finally, Tanya picked up my documentation, flipped through it without really reading, and set it back down. Natalie, she began, in that tone HR professionals perfect, part condescension, part false sympathy. You're a salaried employee, an exempt employee. Company policy doesn't provide overtime pay for exempt positions. But the hours were excessive. I was explicitly asked. You volunteered to support a critical project, she interrupted. No one forced you to work those hours. In fact, she pulled up something on her computer. According to your employment agreement, which you signed, you acknowledge that your position may require extended hours as business needs dictate. My hands clenched in my lap. Extended hours, yes. But 200 hours in 4 months? That's beyond any reasonable interpretation. Natalie. Her voice turned cold, the fake warmth evaporating entirely. You should have read your contract more carefully. Salaried positions at your level don't qualify for overtime. That's standard across the industry. Frankly, I'm surprised someone with your experience doesn't understand this. The condescension stung worse than the rejection. She was painting me as naive, unprofessional, greedy even. I thought about all those nights, all those weekends, all those promises Brian had made about recognition and rewards. What about the promises of compensation? Brian specifically said, unless you have that in writing, I can't speak to any informal conversations. She slid my documentation back across the desk. I appreciate your dedication to the company, Natalie. That kind of commitment doesn't go unnoticed, but if you're looking for hourly compensation, perhaps you should consider whether a salaried position is right for you. The threat was subtle, but clear. Play ball or find another job. I gathered my papers slowly, maintaining eye contact. So just to be clear, Redwell's position is that those 200 hours of work were uncompensated volunteer time. They were part of your job responsibilities as an exempt employee, she replied, already turning back to her computer. Is there anything else? I stood, my legs surprisingly steady. No, you've been very clear. As I walked back to my desk, passing the motivational posters about integrity and values, something crystallized inside me. They thought I would accept this, swallow my anger, and continue being the good soldier. They counted on my need for stability, my fear of confrontation, my history of compliance. They had no idea how much they just miscalculated. That night, I didn't go home and cry. I didn't call my mother or vent to friends. Instead, I opened my laptop and began researching. The Fair Labor Standards Act became my new obsession. I studied the difference between exempt and non-exempt employees, diving deep into job classification requirements, salary thresholds, and the specific duties tests that determine overtime eligibility. What I discovered made my blood run cold, then hot with vindication. Redwell had been playing fast and loose with employee classifications for years. My position and dozens of others had been incorrectly classified as exempt. We didn't meet the administrative, executive, or professional exemption criteria. We were essentially glorified data entry specialists with fancy titles. And the law was clear. We should have been paid overtime. I expanded my documentation system. Every email requesting after-hours work was archived. Every weekend sign-in at the security desk was photographed. I quietly reached out to former employees through LinkedIn, careful to keep my inquiries casual. Hey, just wondering if you kept any of your old timesheets from Redwell? The responses were illuminating. This wasn't just my story, it was systemic. The real breakthrough came from Jason, my former colleague. We met for coffee at a shop far from Redwell's office, where he handed me a USB drive. I probably shouldn't have kept these, he said, glancing around nervously. But when I left, I made copies of some interesting emails, including one where Patricia explicitly tells the management team to maximize voluntary overtime to avoid additional headcount costs. Oh, there's also a spreadsheet showing how much they saved by misclassifying positions. I plugged in the drive that night and found a gold mine. Email threads discussing how to word job descriptions to sound exempt eligible, calculations showing millions saved in overtime pay, even a legal memo warning about potential liability, which had apparently been ignored. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a ghost at work, present but invisible, doing just enough to avoid attention while building my case. I discovered that Ohio had recently strengthened its wage theft laws. I learned about the statute of limitations, the potential for double damages, and most importantly, the protection for whistleblowers. I created a comprehensive file, my own documentation, Jason's emails, timestamps from the security system I'd photographed, even screenshots from Redwell's own social media accounts bragging about our lean operational model. I cross-referenced everything with the Department of Labor's guidelines, highlighting each violation with the precision of someone who'd spent years analyzing financial discrepancies. The whole time, I maintained my poker face at work. I smiled at Tanya in the hallway. I nodded along in meetings where Brian praised our successful cost management. I even attended the quarterly all-hands where Marcus announced record profits, thanks to our operational efficiency. 3 weeks after my HR meeting, I was ready. I'd consulted with a labor attorney, friend of a friend, who confirmed my suspicions and suggested filing a complaint with the Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division. She explained that I could file anonymously initially, though my identity might eventually be revealed if the case proceeded. The DOL takes misclassification seriously, she'd said, especially when it's this systematic. And with the evidence you've gathered, they'll definitely investigate. I spent hours crafting my complaint, organizing the evidence into a clear narrative. Purchase orders showing we had no real purchasing power, emails proving we didn't supervise anyone, documentation that our primary duties were routine financial analysis, not high-level professional work requiring advanced knowledge. But I kept coming back to that 3-line email draft, something so simple it seemed almost insulting to the hours of work I'd put into building the case. Yet there was something powerful in its brevity, a refusal to beg or over-explain. Just the facts, delivered with surgical precision. On a Thursday evening, alone in my apartment with a glass of wine for courage, I made my final edits. I attached the zip file containing months of evidence. My finger hovered over the send button. 6 years of my life, 200 hours of stolen time, countless broken promises. I thought about Tanya's condescending smile, Brian's empty promises, Patricia's calculated exploitation. I thought about my colleagues, still trapped in the same cycle, afraid to speak up. Then I hit send. The morning after sending the email, I arrived at work as if nothing had changed. I made my coffee with the same watery breakroom brew, sat at my desk with the same view of the parking garage, and opened the same spreadsheets that had consumed my life for months. But everything felt different. I carried a secret now. A ticking time bomb delivered in 3 simple lines. My email to the Department of Labor had been almost insultingly brief. To whom it may concern, I am an employee at Redwell Capital Solutions. The company is systematically violating overtime regulations by misclassifying dozens of employees. Attached is supporting documentation. Natalie G. No pleading, no emotion, no elaborate explanation of the human cost. Just facts and evidence, compressed into less than 30 words. Let the zip file do the talking. 47 megabytes of meticulously organized proof. The first week passed without incident. I half expected federal agents to storm the building, which showed how little I knew about government bureaucracy. Instead, life continued its mundane rhythm. Brian assigned me new projects with his usual casual disregard for boundaries. Nothing too crazy, he said, which translated to only 50 hours instead of 70. I became hyper-aware of every interaction. When Tanya passed me in the hallway with her practiced HR smile, did she suspect anything? When Patricia called an unexpected meeting, was it related to my complaint? But no, It was just another quarter, another push for efficiency, another round of exploitation dressed up as opportunity. 2 weeks in, I received an automated email confirming receipt of my complaint, form letter, case number. Expected response time, 4 to 6 weeks. I deleted it immediately, clearing my trash folder with the paranoia of someone who'd learned to document everything but trust nothing. The waiting was excruciating. I'd prepared for confrontation, for immediate consequences, for some kind of dramatic reckoning. Instead, I got ordinary Tuesday mornings and routine performance reviews. I continued playing my part, the reliable Natalie, the team player, the one who never made waves. But subtle changes crept in. I stopped volunteering for extra projects. When Brian hinted about weekend work, I developed sudden conflicts. Family obligations, I'd say, letting him fill in the blanks. I left at 5:30 instead of 7. Small rebellions that felt revolutionary after years of compliance. My colleagues noticed. Must be nice. Sandra from Accounts Payable commented when she saw me packing up at a reasonable hour. There was envy in her voice, but also suspicion. In Redwell's culture, stepping back was seen as stepping out. Week 3 brought unexpected support from an unlikely source. Jason texted, "Heard through the grapevine you've been setting boundaries. Good for you." He didn't know about the complaint, but somehow he sensed the shift. Others who'd escaped Redwell began reaching out, sharing their own stories of exploitation. I realized I'd been building a network of witnesses without even trying. The irony wasn't lost on me. While waiting for the federal government to act, I was already experiencing the consequences of simply working normal hours. Brian's emails grew increasingly passive-aggressive. "Disappointed you couldn't join our weekend planning session." One read, "Team players make time for what matters. I saved everyone." Evidence of retaliation, my attorney friend had called it. "They can't punish you for working only your scheduled hours," she'd explained, "but they'll try to make it look like performance issues, document everything." So I did. The paper trail grew, emails expressing concern about my commitment, meeting notes where my availability was questioned, even a formal warning about failure to demonstrate company values. All because I'd stopped donating my evenings and weekends to Redwell's bottom line. 5 weeks after sending the email, I noticed the first crack. Patricia canceled a standing meeting with no explanation, then another. Senior leadership seemed distracted, huddled in conference rooms with doors closed and blinds drawn. The office buzzed with the kind of nervous energy that preceded layoffs or acquisitions. But I knew better. The storm I'd summoned was approaching. 6 weeks was the outside range of the DOL's response time. I could almost feel it building, like pressure before a thunderstorm. Every day I came to work wondering, is today the day Redwell learns what those 3 lines really meant? I maintained my smile, met my deadlines, and waited. The beauty of my position was its simplicity. I had nothing left to lose. They'd already taken 200 hours of my life. What was a few more weeks of pretending? The countdown had begun, and only I knew when it would reach 0. 6 weeks and 3 days after I sent that email, the storm finally hit Redwell Capital Solutions. It started with a seemingly innocent Tuesday morning. I was reviewing quarterly projections when Sandra burst into the finance department, her face flushed with panic. "There are federal investigators in the lobby," she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "They're asking for Patricia and all the HR files." The effect was instantaneous. Heads popped up from cubicles like prairie dogs sensing danger. Brian emerged from his office, coffee mug frozen halfway to his lips. Someone dropped a stack of papers, the sound sharp in the sudden silence. I kept my eyes on my screen, fingers moving steadily across the keyboard. Just another Tuesday. Just another spreadsheet. Inside, my heart hammered against my ribs. Through the glass walls of the executive conference room, we watched the chaos unfold in real time. 3 investigators in dark suits, badges visible, boxes of documents being wheeled in. Patricia's assistant scrambled back and forth, her usual composure cracking. Tanya Rhodes appeared, her girl boss confidence evaporating as she was escorted into a private meeting. The office transformed into a hive of paranoid whispers. What do you think they're looking for? Is it embezzlement? Are we getting shut down? I contributed nothing to the speculation, just maintained my focus on cell B47, as if the secret to corporate survival was hidden in a formula. By lunch, the investigators had commandeered 2 conference rooms. Employees were being called in one by one. The pattern became clear quickly. They were talking to everyone who'd worked significant overtime in the past 3 years. My turn would come. I'd made sure of that when I'd included my name in the documentation. Marcus Whitfield himself appeared around 2 p.m., flanked by 2 men in expensive suits who screamed, "Legal counsel." His usual swagger was gone, replaced by tight-lipped anxiety. He disappeared into the executive conference room and didn't emerge for hours. At 3:47 p.m., my desk phone rang. "Natalie Grant, we'd like to speak with you in conference room B." The investigator who greeted me was younger than I'd expected, with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail. "Ms. Grant, I'm Special Agent Jennifer Chen with the Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division. We're investigating potential Fair Labor Standards Act violations at Redwell. Your name appears frequently in the employment records. I played my part perfectly, helpful but not over-eager, professional but not rehearsed. Yes, I'd worked significant overtime. Yes, I'd been classified as exempt. No, I hadn't been compensated for those hours. I provided the dates, the hours, the projects, all with the careful precision of someone reconstructing memories, not someone who had every detail memorized. Did you ever raise concerns about overtime compensation? Agent Chen asked. Once, I replied. With HR, I was told it was company policy not to pay overtime for exempt employees. She made a note. Do you have documentation of your hours worked? I reached into my portfolio and pulled out a modest folder. I kept some records, I said, understating the obvious. Inside were copies of the same documents I'd sent anonymously, timestamps, emails, project assignments, evidence that would corroborate what they'd already received. The interview lasted 90 minutes. By the time I returned to my desk, the entire office was in freefall. Emergency meetings were being called and canceled. The company's outside counsel had taken over the large conference room. Papers spread across the table like battle plans. Through it all, the investigators continued their methodical work, interviewing employees, copying files, building their case. That evening, as I prepared to leave at my now standard 5:30, Brian appeared at my desk. His usual smugness had been replaced by something almost vulnerable. Natalie, he began, then stopped, started again. This investigation, did you know about it? I looked him straight in the eye. How would I know about a federal investigation? Brian. He studied my face, searching for something. Guilt, satisfaction, anger. I gave him nothing but professional concern. After a moment, he walked away, shoulders slumped. It was the last real conversation we'd ever have. The next morning, Tanya Rhodes's office was empty, her motivational mugs and certificates gone. Word spread quickly, administrative leave pending investigation. By afternoon, 2 senior executives had also been escorted out. The wolves had entered the henhouse, and the chickens were finally coming home to roost. The Department of Labor's investigation lasted 3 weeks, but its effects rippled through Redwell like an earthquake followed by endless aftershocks. Each day brought new revelations, and I watched from my desk as the company that had stolen so much from its employees finally faced its reckoning. The first domino fell when the investigators uncovered what Jason's documents had revealed, a systematic scheme to misclassify employees spanning nearly a decade. 43 current and former employees were owed overtime pay. The total liability, including penalties for willful violations, reached $1.7 million. I learned the details through the same office grapevine that had once carried gossip about who was getting promoted or fired. Now it buzzed with shock and vindication. They knew, Sandra whispered during a coffee break. They knew the whole time they were breaking the law. The second week brought criminal referrals. Two vice presidents, David Martinez from Operations and Kevin Liu from Finance, were under investigation for falsifying time records. Employees discovered that their official timesheets, submitted to the DOL, showed standard 40-hour weeks, while internal records documented the real hours worked. The forgery was clumsy but effective, hidden only because no one had ever thought to look. Patricia Henley tried to distance herself from the scandal, claiming she'd been unaware of the misclassification scheme. But emails surfaced, some from my anonymous submission, others discovered during the investigation, showing she'd orchestrated the entire system. Her lean operational model had been built on wage theft, pure and simple. The Columbus Dispatch picked up the story on a Wednesday. Local financial firm under federal investigation for wage violations ran on the business section's front page. By Thursday, it had moved to the main section. Local news stations followed, interviewing labor attorneys who called it one of the most egregious cases of systematic wage theft in Ohio's recent history. Clients began pulling their accounts. Redwell's carefully cultivated reputation as a trustworthy financial advisor crumbled overnight. Who wanted financial advice from a company that couldn't even handle its own books honestly? The parking lot grew emptier each day as clients canceled meetings and employees called in, sick, interviewing elsewhere. Marcus Whitfield held an all-hands meeting in the third week, attempting damage control. He stood at the podium where he'd once preached about shared sacrifice and tried to spin the narrative. Mistakes were made, he said. Passive voice doing heavy lifting. We're committed to making this right. But the damage was irreversible. The DOL's final ruling was devastating. Redwell would pay full back wages plus liquidated damages, essentially double damages for willful violations. My personal settlement came to $38,000 for those 200 hours, plus penalties. Others received more. Some who'd been misclassified for years saw six-figure settlements. Tanya Rhodes was terminated for cause the day the final ruling came down. Her LinkedIn profile would later claim she'd left for new opportunities. But everyone knew the truth. She'd been the enforcer of a criminal scheme, hiding behind HR policies while enabling wage theft. The vice presidents faced worse than termination. Federal prosecutors filed charges for falsifying records and conspiracy to violate federal labor laws. Their mugshots in the newspaper showed pale, shocked faces, men who'd never imagined their corner office crimes would have consequences. The most satisfying moment came when I received my settlement check. I held it up to the fluorescent lights. This piece of paper that represented not just money, but vindication. Every late night, every missed dinner, every weekend sacrificed to Redwell's greed. It hadn't been voluntary overtime. It had been theft, and finally, someone had called it what it was. But the check was just paper. The real victory was watching the system that had exploited so many finally face justice. Former employees called to thank me, somehow knowing I'd been involved. I got $47,000, one said, voice breaking. I can finally pay off my student loans. Redwell limped along for another month before announcing a merger with a larger firm. Corporate speak for being absorbed to avoid bankruptcy. The building that had once hummed with stressed-out employees working unpaid overtime grew quiet. The motivational posters about going above and beyond seemed like artifacts from a lost civilization, one built on exploitation and maintained by fear. By the time the dust settled, Redwell Capital Solutions existed only as a cautionary tale, a name whispered in business schools as an example of how wage theft eventually comes due with interest. The last time I walked through Redwell's doors was on a Saturday afternoon in November. The building was nearly empty, just security guards and a few employees packing up their desks. I'd already started my new job at a nonprofit that actually respected work-life balance, but I'd left a few personal items behind, waiting for the right moment to retrieve them. The office felt like a ghost town. Empty cubicles stretched in all directions, their abandoned surfaces still bearing coffee rings and faded sticky notes. The executive floor was completely dark. Patricia's corner office had been stripped bare. Not even the curtains remained. I walked slowly, memorizing the silence, so different from the buzzing anxiety that had once filled these halls. At my old desk, I found my things in a box: a small cactus, some picture frames, a coffee mug that ironically read, "World's Okayest Employee." As I picked up the box, Gary, the security guard who'd watched me enter this building at ungodly hours for 6 years, approached. "You're the one who sent that email, aren't you?" he asked quietly. I considered denying it, maintaining the anonymity I'd hidden behind for months. But what was the point now? Redwell was gone. The people who'd retaliated against anyone who spoke up had been scattered to the winds. "How did you know?" I asked instead. Gary smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. "I've been here 15 years, Ms. Grant. Watched a lot of people come and go. Most leave broken or bitter. But after that investigation started, you walked different, like someone who'd already won." He was right. While others had panicked as Redwell crumbled, I'd felt nothing but calm satisfaction. Every revelation, every termination, every dollar of fines had been a small piece of justice falling into place. "They stole from all of us," I said simply. "Someone had to stop them." Gary nodded. "My daughter works in tech. Her company tried the same thing, calling everyone exempt to avoid overtime. I told her about what happened here. She filed her own complaint last week." He paused. "You started something, Ms. Grant. Something important." As I carried my box through the lobby for the final time, I thought about all the emails I'd been receiving. Former Redwell employees sharing their stories, workers from other companies asking for advice, labor attorneys requesting my documentation as a template. That 3-line email had become a ripple, spreading outward in ways I'd never anticipated. The building's glass doors closed behind me with a soft whoosh. In the parking lot, I turned back for one last look. Redwell Capital Solutions. The sign would be gone within a week, replaced by the acquiring company's logo. But the lesson would remain. My phone buzzed with a text from my new colleague. "Hey Natalie, we're doing Friday drinks if you want to join. Totally optional. We respect boundaries here." I smiled at that. Boundaries, work-life balance, overtime pay, basic concepts that Redwell had treated as laughable naivety. Now I worked somewhere that understood employees were humans, not resources to be strip-mined for profit. As I drove away, I thought about Tanya's condescending words. "You should have read your contract more carefully." She'd been wrong. I had read it carefully. I'd read it, researched it, and discovered it was built on lies. And then I'd done something about it. The truth was simple. They'd counted on our fear, our need for stability, our reluctance to rock the boat. They'd believed we'd accept the theft of our time because challenging them seemed too risky, too difficult, too unlikely to succeed. For years, they'd been right. But exploitation has a breaking point. Mine came in an HR office, facing a woman who looked me in the eye and told me my 200 hours of life were worth nothing. She delivered that message with such casual cruelty, such absolute confidence in the system that protected her and punished us. She'd been half right. The system had been designed to protect them. But systems can be challenged. Laws exist for a reason. And sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to light the match. They thought I'd stay quiet like all the others before me. They thought I'd swallow my anger and accept their theft. They thought wrong. I'd transformed my silence into a weapon, forged from evidence and delivered with surgical precision. 1 email, 3 lines, 47 megabytes of proof, and an entire company brought to its knees. As I pulled into my new office's parking lot at 4:45 p.m. on a Friday because my work was done, I allowed myself one moment of pure satisfaction. They'd stolen 200 hours from me. In return, I'd taken everything from them. Justice served. With interest. Thank you all for listening to my story today. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below, and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your own thoughts or experiences with workplace justice. Your voice matters, and sometimes one email really can change everything.